Hey everyone, we're Caleb and Ava, and today we're sharing a sci-fi story with you. Humanity has sent a team of astronauts to explore beyond the solar system, and they're live streaming their journey every day. My wife is one of them. But one day she suddenly appeared at our doorstep, barely alive. Let's get started. My wife was selected for the New Human program. She and 4 others would represent all of humanity, leaving the solar system aboard a spaceship. From launch to return, everything would be live-streamed. 3 months later, the signal suddenly cut out, and the live feed was just noisy static. The official report said a meteor hit the ship, causing an explosion. All 5 crew members died. But that very evening, my wife burst into the living room, covered in blood, shouting at me, "Run! Who are you?" My scalp tingled and my mind went blank. Ever since my wife was chosen for the New Human program, as her husband, I was proud. Every day, almost 24 hours, I stayed in the live stream room. I watched her leave Earth and enter space, carrying humanity's mission farther away. "Caleb, I know this sounds crazy." My wife stepped forward and grabbed my hand. "But you have to believe me, I really am Ava." Her hand was as cold as snow. Seeing that I didn't believe her, she continued, "Your birthday is June 10th. Your favorite food is codfish burgers. The first time we met was on the subway. You accidentally stained my clothes." Ava listed a bunch of things only the 2 of us knew. Finally, I believed she was Ava and not some stranger who looked exactly like her. But even if she had miraculously survived the accident, she should be light years away. How could she come back to Earth in an instant? How did you come back?" "This is a long story, and there's no time to explain," Ava said while grabbing paper and a pen. "From now on, every word I say you have to remember." She wrote down one coordinate after another on the paper. When she finished the last one, her expression suddenly became extremely pained. "Remember, Caleb, you must go to these places in order, carrying my body." Before I could ask anything, her skin turned from yellow to red, then to white, and finally became as transparent as glass. Her veins were clearly visible, and the fluid flowing through them was actually dark green. "Run, Caleb. You're the only one I trust. They'll definitely come looking for you." "Absolutely. Don't get caught." Ava died. After saying the last word, she spat out a mouthful of fresh blood and stopped breathing. Even weirder, the dark green blood evaporated instantly upon touching the floor, leaving only a small corroded pit. Contradictorily, her body was freezing cold, almost capable of causing frostbite. At that moment, there was another knock at the door. "Hello, is Mr. Caleb home? We're from the space agency. We have some questions for you." I broke out in a cold sweat instantly. The space agency was where Ava worked and where they sent her into space. Before she died, Ava said someone would come looking for me. Could it be the space agency people? "Mr. Caleb, we know you're home. Please cooperate and open the door. Thank you." The knocking outside became more urgent. "Mr. Caleb, please cooperate with our work." This time they were practically banging on the door. Before I could think, I had to hide Ava's body first. Surprisingly, the body, which should have been heavy, was as light as a feather. With just one hand, I could easily drag her. After hiding her body, I cleaned myself up and opened the door. In the hallway stood 4 people, a woman and 3 men, all wearing white lab coats. I immediately became alert. The 3 men were clearly trained fighters. Their muscle lines couldn't be hidden even by the loose lab coats. Upon entering the room, the woman and I sat on the sofa, with 2 men staring at us from the front and back, and another standing by the door. Obviously, they came prepared. I dared not guess what was bulging at their waists. Mr. Caleb, first of all, on behalf of the space agency, we express our deepest condolences for Ava's sacrifice. Ava is a hero for all humanity. Believe me, our feelings are as heavy as yours." I nodded to thank them, but I was still nervous inside. They were definitely not here just to offer condolences. Otherwise, why would they come late at night and bring 3 thugs? "Mr. Caleb," as expected, the woman changed the topic and asked, "Did anything strange happen to you today?" "Strange? No, nothing." The woman frowned. "Caleb, we don't like liars." I felt my heart almost jump out of my throat, but at this point I could only play dumb. "What lie? I don't understand what you're talking about." The woman stared at me for a long time, then turned to the man behind her and gave a glance. The 3 quickly shut all doors and windows, pulled the curtains, then walked around the living room holding instruments. "What I'm about to say concerns the fate of all humanity. Absolutely no leaks." The woman spoke word by word. "Caleb, do you want to know the truth about Ava's death?" I held my breath. To me, Ava had died twice. The first time was during the live stream, where she died in space under everyone's gaze. The second time was in front of me, when she spat out a mouthful of toxic blood and died. I wanted to know the truth more than anyone. New Human Program is a grand plan that can change the entire world. Before this, we envisioned many possible outcomes, like new planets to live on and endless space resources. Of course, we also prepared for the unavoidable possibility: aliens. Scholars have different attitudes towards aliens, some pessimistic, some optimistic, some think they don't exist at all. On the eve of the program's execution, we gathered many scholars and used AI to assess the risks. Our final conclusion is that the dark forest theory doesn't exist in reality. The possibility that aliens would benefit humanity is nearly 99.9%. At this point, the woman wasn't calm anymore. She trembled a bit and lit a cigarette. "Sorry, when I'm nervous or scared, I smoke a cigarette." The facts proved we were wrong. That 0.1%, though like a needle in the ocean, and perhaps never encountered for tens of thousands of years, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The moment you see it, it changes from 0.1% to 100%. We don't know where the aliens' home planet is, nor their culture or exact technology level. We only know their civilization is far more advanced than Earth's. The moment they encountered our astronauts, they delivered a devastating blow. All of humanity's highest intelligence defense measures are ineffective in their eyes. What's worse, they can disguise themselves as astronauts and come to Earth. Nobody knows their purpose, but one thing is for sure: it won't be friendly communication. Now, Mr. Caleb, you should know why we're here to find you, right? This is all really unbelievable. After a long silence, I replied, "But I've been home alone all day, haven't seen anyone." The woman and the man behind her exchanged glances. "Mr. Caleb, please allow us to search your home." This isn't about distrust. We don't know the capabilities of aliens. What if they can manipulate minds? Soon, they turned my house upside down. But they found nothing, because I had already hidden Ava's body in a secret compartment under the floor. The woman's gaze was still suspicious, but she had to let it go. However, as she was about to leave, her high heels stepped on the secret compartment. She frowned, then stomped her feet again. "Not right. The sound from this floor is off." The thugs understood and crouched down to pull open the floor. I panicked and instinctively tried to stop them, but another thug blocked me. "Mr. Caleb," the woman said gloomily, "this is serious. Please cooperate with the investigation." But in the next second, she frowned and took out sleeping pills, ropes, charcoal, and some girly items from the secret compartment. The compartment was packed with all sorts of things. "What's going on?" "You're Ava's colleague," You should know about that accident, right? I stopped struggling and said sadly, even if you didn't, when you searched the room just now, you should have seen the photos, right? 5 years ago, our daughter Poppy died in a car accident. That year, she just started middle school, one of the best ages in life. Since then, Ava and I have been in a constant state of gloom. The New Human program is grand and long-term, expected to complete in exactly 20 years, under ideal circumstances. Before departure, Ava told me she'd likely spend 30 years in space, maybe even the rest of her life. All astronauts selected for the program are single, except Ava, who once had a family. This isn't because we're so great we can give up all personal feelings, but because we just don't want to live anymore. She dedicated her life to a former dream, and I quietly died after watching her enter the unknown realms humanity had never stepped into before. This was our original plan. I was worried Poppy's stuff would get dusty, so I hid them in a secret compartment. Later, fearing relatives and friends might find them, I also stashed my suicide tools there. After hearing my story, the woman finally dropped her hostility. Sorry to bother you. Also, if you need it, we can connect you with a psychologist. Thanks. No need for a doctor, unless they can bring people back from the dead. The woman apologized again and left the house with 3 thugs. The moment the door closed, my legs went weak, almost making me collapse. Ava's body was actually in the secret compartment, but I had buried it at the bottom. Luckily, they were moved by my story and didn't dig deeper. Otherwise, if they had taken everything out, they could have exposed my lie. Ava, what the hell is going on? I stared at the secret compartment, muttering to myself. No one answered, only the rumble of the night wind hitting the window. I thought all night, and the next day, I still put Ava's body into the suitcase. Although her current state definitely doesn't look human, too pale, too cold, too light, and the veins under her skin were too weird. She looked like a ghost from games and movies, as if she could disappear at any moment. However, what happened to her was strange, but the space agency's explanation was hard to believe. If Ava really encountered aliens, their technology is way above ours, and they were eyeing Earth hungrily. Why not attack directly? Why take a detour and disguise themselves as humans? Even if it was to gather intelligence, they shouldn't have come looking for me, a quitter at home, planning to commit suicide. Moreover, since aliens are so powerful, who gave them the fatal wounds? All these reasons made me lean towards believing Ava. As for whether she was real and how she could travel billions of kilometers in an instant, I could only investigate step by step. I drove to the first location Ava left me, the Sphinx. As a famous historical site, it's always crowded. Ava gave me exact coordinates inside the park, so I could only drag the suitcase into the crowd, hoping to blend in. The outcome was obvious. Security stopped me. Just as I was about to use forgetting to buy a ticket as an excuse to leave the queue and find another way, the security guy surprisingly helped me put the suitcase into the machine. Why is your suitcase so light? Is there nothing inside? I was so scared I couldn't speak, just mechanically nodded. I seemed to hear the shrill sound of alarms, but to my surprise the suitcase passed security smoothly. Afraid of making a mistake after entering the park, I immediately hid in the restroom. Ava's body was still in the suitcase, intact, and didn't even stink from the heat. The only difference was that she seemed more transparent and lighter. A bold idea suddenly popped into my head. I first took out my phone to take pictures of the body, but the screen was blank. Looks like passing security wasn't a coincidence, but these machines couldn't see her. Then, after confirming someone was in the adjacent booth, I held my breath and reached Ava's hand through the gap under the partition, then quickly pulled it back. I tried this back and forth a few times, timing it so she could just barely see it, but not clearly. Soon a voice came from next door. "Hey buddy, what are you doing? Didn't bring paper?" I didn't answer, got up and left the restroom. Looks like Ava's body can be seen by people, but not detected by machines. This discovery couldn't solve all the puzzles, but still made me excited. After all, each clue reduces the fog in front of me. After having lunch in the park in the afternoon, I dragged the suitcase to the worship plaza, waiting quietly. Behind the coordinates Ava gave me were a string of numbers. At first, I didn't know what they meant, but later realized they were times. It meant that on May 5th, 2025, at 5:50 p.m., I should be at the latitude and longitude Ava left, carrying her body. Now there was still an hour left. Just then, I suddenly noticed a small group of people looking unusual in the plaza. Not only that, judging by their clothing, they seemed like old acquaintances. All of them had special patterns on their collars belonging to a special organization called SCI. Members of this organization weren't active in the public eye, obsessed with religion, history, and mysticism, ignored for years. Until the space agency announced the new human program, they suddenly popped up to strongly oppose the plan. The SCI organization and its members claimed that gods actually existed, and the new human program would be seen as humans disrespecting the gods. Such ridiculous and superstitious statements made them public laughters, and the space agency ignored them. Until a group of crazy SCI followers infiltrated the space agency headquarters, destroying a lot of classified documents. Since then, both sides fell into a tug of war. Even though the new human program was finally executed successfully, the heavy investment in security caused the space agency to fall into a long-term financial deficit. Both sides hated each other deeply. However, all the SCI organization's actions were always related to the space agency. Why were they here? As I was thinking, a few SCI organization members suddenly pounced on an innocent passerby. They dragged the passerby to the corner, examined him, then gave him some money and let him go. This scene wasn't exactly violent, but made my heart pound. Because that passerby was dragging a suitcase just like me, I found a place to hide. No doubt, the members of the SCI organization came for Ava. Their targets were all tourists dragging suitcases or carrying big bags. Besides, they must know something else, because the closer to the time, the more nervous they looked. Finally, at 4:55 p.m., a large crowd suddenly flooded into the plaza. They roughly pushed aside the tourists, occupying the center of the plaza. These people were incredibly strong, easily pushing others several meters away. Tourists stopped, curious, and started to watch. Under everyone's gaze, they faced the bronze statue and lined up neatly. At 4:58 p.m., they suddenly all knelt down, bowing to the statue. Their synchronized movements made many tourists think it was a performance, and they couldn't help but clap. Then they stood up and used their right hands to grab their left arms. The god said, "Humanity needs luck, so we have the left hands. Today, we return it here." As soon as they said this, these people simultaneously tore off their left hands. Then they waved the severed limbs, poking their throats with their fingers. From standing up to collapsing in just 5 seconds, there was no hesitation or fear. Contrasting sharply with the rushing blood, their expressions remained calm. They seemed to feel no pain or fear, like being hungry or thirsty, naturally walking towards death. The previously peaceful worship plaza suddenly turned into a river of blood, with bodies everywhere. Along with a scream, the stunned tourists finally snapped out of it, screaming and fleeing in terror. In the chaos, I saw that the blood on the ground wasn't flowing randomly, but gradually gathered into a crimson stream. The blood flowed up the steps, forming a blood pool in front of the bronze statue several meters high in the plaza. The dark green bronze statue gradually turned blood red. It came to life. The creepy head rotated strangely until it locked eyes with mine. A beam of golden light shot out from its swollen, huge eyes, hitting my suitcase exactly. "Over there!" someone shouted. The Eye organization members didn't panic at the bloody scene or care about the terrifying statue. Instead, they swarmed towards me. Seeing this, I grabbed the suitcase and ran. Luckily, the scene was in chaos. I was dizzy from being bumped, but the Eye organization couldn't catch me. After breaking out of the crowd, I returned to the car, avoided the crowded main roads, and quickly fled via a small path. Only after confirming no one was following did I release the gas pedal and take a deep breath. I looked at the time. It showed 5:15 p.m. From the incident to now, it was less than half an hour, but to me, it felt like a century. The worldviews I had relied on for decades were now collapsing. I could feel that the world in front of me was becoming increasingly strange and dangerous, and I, like a lonely boat, had no support, always at risk of being swallowed by the raging currents. "Ava, what have you been through these past few months? Do you know what's happening where you asked me to bring you? Dead. So many people died. And that statue, damn it, maybe it wants to kill me." I desperately buried my head in the steering wheel. What to do? What should I do now? Say something. Naturally, I knew no one would respond. Bang, bang, bang. I froze. The sound was coming from the passenger seat. I had placed Ava's body in the suitcase on top. I slowly turned my head. Bang, bang, bang. I wasn't mistaken or seeing things. The sound was coming from the suitcase. My scalp tingled. At this moment, along with the knocking sound, the suitcase was rhythmically vibrate. Though I knew the box held the body of someone I'd spent 20 years with, the scene in front of me was still freaky enough to chill me to the bone. My hand trembled as I reached out. When the box opened, I didn't know whether to feel relieved or disappointed. Ava wasn't coming back to life. Her body was exactly the same as before, the only change being her left hand. It wasn't light, it wasn't pale, and the dark green blood didn't flow through it anymore. It was back to normal. No, scratch that. It was better than normal. The lines were smooth, the skin flawless, the muscle and fat perfectly balanced, strong but still soft and graceful, like something out of a Da Vinci drawing. It was perfect. Clearly, the sound I'd heard earlier came from that hand, because now, right under my nose, it was moving. I couldn't even describe how surreal it all was. Ava's still a corpse, but her left hand, it was alive, and it almost seemed like it had a mind of its own. And even worse, there was something sacred about its movements, and that made everything feel even weirder. The left hand slowly raised up and pointed at my phone, which I'd left on the steering wheel. I swallowed hard and handed it over to her. A moment later it typed, "Leave." "Leave?" I was confused. "What do you mean? Where am I supposed to go?" "She told you," it replied. I thought back to that night when Ava had given me the coordinates and time. "She? You mean Ava?" I couldn't help asking. "Aren't you supposed to be part of her?" The left hand didn't move. I thought it hadn't heard me, so I pressed, "So, what exactly are you?" This time, it typed, "You, come closer." I leaned in, holding my breath. Just as I was wondering how a hand with no mouth could speak, it suddenly grabbed me by the throat. I struggled, but it was ridiculously strong. No matter how much I fought, I couldn't break free. Everything around me started to blur. Just as I thought I was done for, it let go. Gasping for air, I saw it type on the phone. "You're disrespectful. From now on, if you call my name wrong again, you die." "Name, cough, cough, name." The pain in my throat made me choke. "Cough, what? What's your name?" This time, it didn't type on the phone. Instead, it extended its index finger and black mist formed between its fingers. Then it wrote in the air, "God, God," a left hand on a corpse claiming to be God. That felt like a little bit of a slap in the face to the whole idea of God. I had my doubts, but I still followed its orders. After all, I didn't want to be choked to death. So 3 days later, I found myself in Lashan with Ava's body and the left hand. I'd now figured out all the coordinates. Every single one was linked to religious, historical, or faith-related landmarks. The next stop after the Sphinx, the giant Buddha in Leshan, China. When I saw the Buddha for the first time, even though I had prepared myself, I was still shocked. The photos online didn't even come close to conveying the scale. Even though I usually scoff at religion, I couldn't deny that there was power in that statue. I couldn't imagine how the ancient people built such a wonder. Maybe they had some divine help. I didn't take the boat. Too many people. I just carried my backpack and followed the crowd. I didn't use the suitcase anymore because the God hand thought it was too stuffy. It folded Ava's body and ordered me to put it in my backpack instead. It wouldn't let me zip the bag all the way up, leaving a gap so the hand could breathe. At first I refused. I didn't want to walk around with a hand sticking out of my bag. It was like advertising that I was a murderer. But strangely, when I went out, not a single person seemed to notice the hand. The God hand seemed to only be visible to me. Soon enough, it was time. At 2:15 p.m., a group of people appeared out of nowhere, climbed over the barriers, snuck past the guards, and jumped onto the Buddha's shoulder, then climbed to the top of its head. Their reckless stunt made the tourists scream. The guards rushed to stop them, but they were already too late. The group on top of the Buddha used their left hands to grab its right arm. God said, "Humanity needs power, so we have the right hand. Today, we return it." Even though I'd seen this before, I still felt a chill when they ripped off the right hand. This time, they didn't kill themselves. Instead, they jumped from the Buddha's head, which was 70 meters above the ground. The scene erupted into chaos, with tourists screaming in panic. That's when I saw the Buddha's head move. The head of the Buddha blocked the sun, casting a shadow over me. Those calm, ancient eyes shot out golden rays, and the light hit my backpack. In an instant, I felt the weight on my back increase. Something was struggling to break free. I turned around and saw it, a right hand. The two hands were now weirdly tangled together, forming a blooming flower. Then, the flower wilted, the hands separated, and everything returned to normal. That new right hand slowly raised its finger and wrote in the air, "My name is the Buddha." Two strange encounters, both shaking my understanding of the world, made me start to guess what was going on. First the left hand, now the right. These bloody rituals seemed to be giving Ava a new body. But I couldn't be sure if the person who came back would still be her. Luckily, the next destination was far away, and there was a half-month gap. That gave me plenty of time to think about my situation. Along the way, I kept observing the left and right hands. They didn't give me a warm feeling. Whenever they were around, they acted like they were above me, constantly giving orders. What confused me even more was that while Ava's legs, torso and head were visible to others, only I could see the hands. It often made me feel like I was dreaming. Whatever I was doing, as soon as I spaced out, I'd hear whispers. The whispers were hard to understand. One day, I decided to secretly memorize what they were saying. I ran it through several translation apps, but every one of them came back with none. This language didn't exist in the human world. These strange experiences made me doubt what I was about to do, but since it was Ava's dying wish, and because I was afraid of the hands, I had no choice but to press on. One night, in a rest stop on the highway, I had a nightmare. In the dream, I entered a grand church. From the outside, it was almost as big as a small mountain. Inside, a service was underway. People sat on either side, singing hymns with the choir. The priest stood at the front, reading from the Bible. When both the Old and New Testaments were done, the priest blessed the congregation in God's name, and everyone recited the Lord's Prayer. By the time the ceremony ended, it was evening. The priest stood before a statue of Jesus, kissing the cross pendant in his hands. Sunlight streamed through the dome skylight, shining down on the priest and making him look sacred. If I were Christian, I'd probably be crying my eyes out over this scene. But as an outsider, when I turned to leave, I saw something strange. The believers who had left earlier, they came back. Only they didn't walk back. They were being dragged by thin threads, flying through the air. And the light in the church suddenly dimmed, like something had appeared, blocking the sun. A strange fear spread through my chest, and as my heart pounded, I slowly turned my head. The priest was hiding in the shadows. Above him, a giant spider sat in its web, its massive body filling most of the church. Its abdomen and legs were covered in hundreds of blood-red eyes, and the threads that had been pulling the people were coming from those eyes. I screamed and fell to the ground. "Monster! There's a monster!" "A monster? Where?" The priest's voice came from the shadows. "I don't see anything. It's right above me." "Above you?" The priest's cross had turned into a white cocoon, and he lovingly caressed it like a baby. "Ah, so you can see it too." "I can definitely see it. It just appeared out of nowhere." I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't move. No matter how hard I struggled, I stayed in. A strand of thread shot towards me, grabbing the collar of my shirt. I was being targeted. When I woke up from the nightmare, I found the left hand yanking at my collar, shaking me. Meanwhile, the right hand was typing on the phone. "They're onto you. Get out now!" I was wide awake in an instant. Through the car window, I saw several pickup trucks suddenly pull into the service area, parking around me. The closest one had 3 men get out, sneaking toward me. I didn't hesitate, fired up the engine and switched on the high beams. The blinding light hit them, and I recognized the familiar logo on their clothes. Members of the SCI organization. To be honest, I feared them a lot more than the space agency. I knew the space agency was after me because of Ava, but I had no clue about the SCI group. So while the 3 guys were still blinded by the headlights, I threw it in reverse and floored the gas. The pickup behind me didn't react fast enough, and I slammed into it, knocking it sideways. I found the gap and sped out of their trap. They didn't try to hide anymore. They fired up their engines and chased me down the highway. For the next 3 days, it was a non-stop cat-and-mouse game. Every time they almost caught up, the left and right hands would come up with new routes and strategies to shake them off. But just when I thought I was safe, they'd show up again, right in front of me. By the end of those 3 days, my mind and body were completely drained. Then, the hands seemed to figure something out and told me to move them to the front of the car. They twisted into a spiral and then stacked on the hood. A moment later, they typed on the phone. "Your car's been tagged." I suddenly understood. No wonder they were sticking to me like glue. They had planted a tracker. "Can you help me find it? Just pull out the GPS, that's all." To my surprise, the usually so confident left and right hands seemed stumped. "Special method." After a pause, they typed, "Can't help." I was shocked, but also inspired to come up with a workaround. After I lost the tail once more, I drove to a remote forest. I parked, got out, and picked a big tree to mark it. After stashing Ava's body in the backpack, I climbed up. I knew burying it would be safer, but the hands insisted that gods shouldn't be buried in dirt, threatening to choke me out if I even suggested it again. After hiding Ava and the body in the tree, I drove off alone. Based on the past few times, I knew it'd take them 1 or 2 hours to catch up. Plenty of time for me to stop at a nearby town, have a bowl of noodles, then slowly ride back to the woods. By the time they figured out my car's parked in the crowded lot, I'd already be long gone. Pleased with myself for being so clever, I ordered some extra meat and another bowl of noodles from the shop. After a good meal, I leaned back, burped, wiped my mouth, and walked out of the noodle shop. The afternoon sun was blazing hot, almost blinding. Yet, in the middle of that heat, I felt a chill. Before I could react, 2 burly guys rushed around the corner, grabbed me from both sides. "Cooperate and don't make a sound." Their voices were cold, no emotion at all. When they spoke, I clearly felt a gun pressing against my back. I had no choice but to follow their lead, walking toward the unknown. 15 minutes later, I was shoved into a narrow alley where a Mercedes van was waiting. The door swung open, and a familiar figure appeared. White lab coat, high heels. Yes, it was the woman who came to my house that night. "Long time no see," she smiled at me. "Mr. Caleb." Her smile was sweet and intelligent, but it sent a chill down my spine. "It seems like you've forgotten a few things," she continued. "We at NASA don't tolerate liars." Naturally, I was taken away, but instead of heading to NASA's headquarters, they took me to a secret base nearby. According to the woman, the base was built for the New Humanity project, with all the personnel and equipment focused on completing one monumental task. Its security level was top secret, SSS tier, higher than anything involving national secrets. Even NASA's veterans had never been there. "You probably don't understand what SSS means," she said. "Before this, even national security projects only had an S-level rating." Hearing that, I felt like I'd just died inside, too scared to even speak. They were telling me something this important. Was this just a setup to shut me up? I covered my ears and shut my eyes the whole way, terrified of seeing something I shouldn't. But surprisingly, I wasn't tortured. Instead, they led me to a lounge, sat me on a comfy sofa, and a server even brought me hot tea. I was parched, so I couldn't care less about my fear, and took a sip. The rich aroma of tea filled my senses, and I felt my tense nerves finally loosen up a bit. When I set the cup down, I saw a young man in a suit sitting across from me. He looked about 18 or 19, tall and handsome, but something about his demeanor was way older than his age. "Mr. Caleb, you've had a rough journey." His voice was hoarse. "Miss Lee didn't give you too much trouble, did she?" "Miss Lee?" The woman behind him laughed. "That's me." I blinked. "Huh?" How could they both look so different but be on opposite ends of the age spectrum? "What's the matter, Mr. Caleb? You feeling sick from the trip?" No, I stammered, laughing awkwardly. "I just didn't expect you to call her Miss Lee." "Mr. Caleb, come on. I was born in 80, she in 95. Shouldn't I call her Miss Lee?" "Wait, you were born in 80? You're 45 this year." "Yeah, what's wrong with that?" Edward chuckled like a teenage boy. "If you don't believe me, I can show you my ID." No need," I said, realizing I'd messed up. "It's just, you look so young. Honestly, if you told me you were still a teenager, I'd believe it." "Many people say that," Edward replied, taking a sip of tea. "Especially Miss Lee. She's always going on about how she envies me. But the secret to staying young isn't hard. It's just that most people don't know how to do it." "That secret," Miss Lee chimed in, rolling her eyes. "I think it only works for you." "Anyway, Their little back and forth caught my attention. Can you share the secret, Whit? What Edward's talking about is really just 2 words. As I waited for Edward's response, a crackling old voice came from behind me. Edward, who had been sitting back, immediately stood up. He and Miss Lee both bowed towards the door. "Sir, you're here?" I followed their gaze and saw a short, chubby old man, leaning on a cane, shakily making his way toward us. He took the seat at the head of the table, folding his hands over his cane. Millions of years ago, our human ancestors hid in caves, knowing nothing about the outside world. Thousands of years ago, ancient people were stuck in their small piece of land, thinking the earth was flat and couldn't go beyond their borders. 1,000 years ago, our ancestors couldn't even see the heavens, so they made up gods to explain the stars. And now our spacecraft fly into space, and telescopes let us see light years away. We humans, who once cowered in caves and couldn't even fathom the universe, got to where we are because of just 2 words. George tapped his cane on the floor. Keep curiosity. Because of curiosity, humanity became the dominant species on this planet. Because of curiosity, Edward stays young, and here I am, a 100-year-old man still moving around. And it's also because of curiosity that we started the New Human Project. The results weren't great, but it pushed humanity into a new realm, a vast universe where we're not alone. Knowledge-seeking is the greatest virtue of humankind. That's why we hate lies so much. Lies are the only thing standing between humanity and the truth. So, Caleb, I hope you understand what I'm saying, and I hope this is the last time I have to ask you. George looked up at me. His eyes, cloudy with age, suddenly sparkled with intensity. After that accident, what exactly did you do? I was silent for a moment. Then I forced myself to speak. I don't know what you're talking about. Caleb, playing dumb won't help you, Miss Lee said, then pulled out a tablet and set it in front of me. The screen showed news reports about incidents at the Sphinx and the Leshan giant Buddha. Miss Lee swiped the screen and brought up a few photos from the scene. We'd heard for a while that the SCI organization members were planning some crimes, but we couldn't get any evidence to report it, so we had to investigate ourselves. We were just trying to find proof of the SCI organization's crimes, maybe stop them. But guess who we found at the scene? She selected 2 photos and zoomed in. In the images, people were fleeing the scene, but there I was, just standing there, staring like an idiot. Caleb, you were there both times. Now you can't deny it. If you really didn't know anything, why were you there? And why did you act so differently from everyone else? Miss Lee's words broke down the last of my hope. I realized I had lost. I took a shaky sip of tea, clearing my throat, which had gone dry from nerves. I saw Ava. The night you reported her death, I saw her come home. I spilled everything that had happened in the past few days. Of course, I left out some key details, like the weird state of Ava's body and the strange existence of my 2 hands. I only told them that Ava came home and died again, asking me to take her body to different places. Surprisingly, none of them seemed suspicious about my story. So, Caleb, could you tell us where you hid the body? George asked, shifting the conversation. I didn't answer right away. The earlier conversation gave me just enough time to calm down from the panic and tension. Sorry, George, I said. I can't tell you where I hid her until I figure out exactly what happened to Ava. Caleb, what do you mean by that? Miss Lee raised an eyebrow. Ava and the others encountered aliens, and tragically, she died. The story should be pretty clear by now, right? I don't agree, especially with this whole alien theory, I replied. George furrowed his brow. What do you mean? George, you said curiosity is humanity's greatest virtue. I forced myself to stay calm. If we can't be sure something is 100% true, we should never believe it, right? George blinked, then suddenly burst out laughing. You're a smart one, Caleb. You don't trust us, huh? Fine, then take him downstairs. After George gave the order, Edward and Miss Lee escorted me out of the meeting room and into the elevator. The elevator stopped after a few seconds, and the door opened onto a long, bright corridor. The corridor stretched on, lined with all kinds of rooms. We walked for quite a while before stopping in front of a door. It looked like a regular door, but opening it was anything but simple. There were layers of security, fingerprints, retina scans, facial recognition, and a password. When Edward finally got the door open, a blast of cold air hit me. Damn, why is it so cold in here? I shivered, about to complain that we'd entered a freezer, when I realized there were no vents in the walls or ceiling. Inside the small room, there were 4 beds, each with a body lying on it. The bone-chilling cold was coming from the bodies. You'd better brace yourself, Edward said, patting my shoulder before walking up to one of the bodies and pulling the sheet off. The worst thing I could imagine happened next. The bodies on the beds were all astronauts from the New Human project. But worse than that, they were all like Ava, pale to the point of being almost transparent, cold as ice, their veins filled with dark green, strange blood. The only difference was that Ava seemed to have died from poisoning and bleeding, but these bodies had obvious fatal wounds. I mustered the courage to step forward and reach out. In the freezing cold, I realized in horror that they were as light as Ava. I could lift them with one hand. "What the hell is going on?" I gasped. "Caleb, if I'm not mistaken," Miss Lee said with a smile, "Ava was probably like them, wasn't she?" Her smile made me furious, and I turned to glare at her. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You've lied to us repeatedly," she snorted. "We've been more than patient with you, and now you still have the nerve to ask me what I mean?" "Enough, Miss Lee," Edward intervened, stepping in to calm things down. "Caleb's just left out some details. He's not lying. As for what happened, Caleb, let me explain." I nodded. So far, I had a decent impression of Edward. I don't know if you'll understand this, but the night of the accident, Ava wasn't the only one who came back to Earth. Just hours after we issued the official announcement of her death, 2 suspicious figures appeared at the base. At first, we didn't think much of it, since big organizations like NASA often get visited by rats. But then, unexpectedly, these 2 broke through all the security and managed to steal top-secret information. Caleb, you probably don't know this, but after a major security breach a few years ago, NASA's security budget skyrocketed. Not even international spies can get through, let alone regular rats. That night, every single person at NASA was mobilized, and we managed to catch the 2 before they escaped. But when we caught them, no one was celebrating. Everyone looked more serious than ever. Because these 2 were astronauts we'd seen die at the hands of aliens. George immediately locked down the information and brought the 2 back to the base for questioning. Almost at the same time, we got a call from the military. They told us 2 suspicious figures had tried to break into a restricted area and were shot on sight by the guards. You can probably guess who they were. The military was calling to inform us and demand an explanation. They couldn't understand why 2 people who should have been dead were now in a military zone, and why their bodies were in such strange condition. Luckily, George had a strong relationship with the military and they trusted him. They handed the bodies over to us with the request that we investigate and give them a proper explanation. But things didn't go as planned. Just as we were talking to the military, the 2 surviving astronauts suddenly turned on us, grabbed the guards' weapons, and killed themselves. The situation was at a standstill until someone remembered the New Human project and that there was still 1 astronaut left. "So you came to find me," I said, finally understanding the situation, though still confused. But I don't get why you're so sure this has anything to do with aliens. Edward raised 3 fingers. First, to prevent mass panic, the New Human Project's live stream had a 5-minute delay. After the alien encounter, we immediately cut the stream, so you didn't see what really happened. But we saw the alien ship, how it mercilessly destroyed our spacecraft. Second, although I didn't see Ava's body, I'm sure she was like them, light, cold, and transparent, right? Caleb, we both know this kind of thing doesn't exist on Earth. The third reason, Edward continued, is also what made us determined to find you. Those 2 mass suicides at the Sphinx and the Leshan giant Buddha. George already told you we'd be there, right? We were heading for the Eye organization, and finding you was a nice surprise. But Caleb, do you know why we're so focused on them? Of course, I replied. The whole mess between NASA and the Eye group has been public knowledge for years. Right. Since you're Ava's husband, you probably understand us better than most. Edward nodded. So, do you know why the Eye organization has it out for NASA? Ava mentioned something about them thinking the New Humans Project was blasphemous to the gods. Exactly. This so-called Eye group is basically a bunch of lunatics. They disrespect every god, Buddha, Tao, immortal, and saint. Even the most baseless superstitions they treat like holy scripture. Edward swore, rare for him. Damn, just talking about them pisses me off. I get that. I don't like them either. But what do they have to do with aliens? Think about it. A civilization that can travel billions of kilometers in hours, wipe out our most advanced tech with ease, and is hundreds, maybe even thousands, of years ahead of us in technology. What do you think these ignorant fools would think of it? His words clicked, and I couldn't help but blurt out, "Gods!" Now you're getting it. The 5 dead astronauts who suddenly came back to Earth divided into 3 groups, each going after different targets, one for human space tech, one for military tech, and as for the third, I don't know exactly what the Eye lunatics want, but based on the first 2, it's got to be related to an alien invasion. I remembered the left and right hands that appeared after those terrifying ceremonies. I wasn't an idiot. I knew they didn't belong to Ava, didn't belong to Earth. But I had hoped that if I just followed the rituals, Ava would return to this world. Little did I know, my selfish hope almost brought humanity to its knees. Clearly, those aliens are so confident they don't need to show up on Earth. With just these 5 pieces on the board, they can enslave or wipe out humanity. I know it sounds crazy, like something out of a bad sci-fi movie. And the weird bodies, it's all breaking down everything we thought we knew. Edward met my eyes. But Caleb, science isn't the truth. In the vastness of space, what we know is a drop in the ocean. So please believe us. No matter what you've seen or heard, it's all fake. A scam. The 5 astronauts in the New Humans Project were our closest friends. Heroes we spent countless hours and resources nurturing. Losing them has hurt us just as much as it has you. But Caleb, those who are gone are gone. You can't bring them back with your uncontrolled grief. It only leads to more tragedy. I get it, but I need to tell you, Ava is now a star in the distance. Don't keep making the same mistake. When Edward finished, I couldn't hold back anymore. I collapsed, my face in my hands, crying uncontrollably. Edward, sensing my breakdown, didn't push me further. Instead, he told Miss Lee to get me a room so I could rest. Death can't be undone. Please, take care of yourself, Caleb. Get some sleep, and we'll talk more tomorrow. But I couldn't sleep. After losing my daughter, the only thing keeping me alive was seeing Ava leave the solar system, fulfilling her dream. But life wasn't fair. It took her away from me again, and crueler still, it gave me hope only to tear it away when I believed. "Why?" I screamed in the darkness of the room. "Why is this happening to me?" "Because you're so damn easy to fool." Suddenly, a second voice broke through the silence. I jumped, looking toward the door, which had somehow opened without me noticing. A man in a mask stood there, holding a gun aimed straight at me. "Who are you? If you're here to kill me, then get it over with. I don't care anymore. Who I am doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm not here to kill you. I'm here to show you the truth." The masked man smiled. For some reason, his voice sounded strangely familiar. But with the mask, his voice was muffled, distorted. I couldn't quite place it. "And I'll tell you this, if you die now, you'll regret it." "What do you mean by that?" "If you want to know, just follow me." The man turned and walked out. After hesitating for a moment, I followed him. After all, what did I have to lose? I'd already decided I was done with this world. The base was quiet at night, but security was still tight. Footsteps echoed in the hall, and the occasional harsh light would flash on, illuminating the space. But the masked man was clearly familiar with the place, always finding tiny gaps to slip through and avoid patrols. He knew exactly where the blind spots were, and even bypassed locked doors requiring high-level clearance. That confirmed it. He had to be from NASA, someone important. We kept moving, hiding and dodging, until an hour later we reached our destination. It was clear that this place was highly classified. I'd lost count of how many patrols we'd evaded, how many security checks we'd passed. Even those damn password-locked doors I'd grumbled about earlier had shown up at least 3 times today. When the final door opened, I realized I was about to enter NASA's most restricted area. Despite preparing myself, the scene that unfolded shocked me. I expected to see something related to aliens, alien tech, strange organs floating in formaldehyde, maybe even human traitors working with the enemy. But none of that showed up. Instead, in front of me stood a massive rocket, surrounded by movie-quality special effects curtains. The words "New Humans Program" were boldly displayed on the rocket's side, marking it for what it was. If my memory served me right, this was the rocket Ava and the others had used to leave Earth and head into space. "I don't know much about space tech," I said, turning to the masked man. "But is it really possible for a used rocket to still look this good?" He just grinned and said, "Heh, seeing isn't always believing." I got his point and walked closer, reaching out to feel it. My heart froze. The rocket was made of plastic and cardboard. Even someone like me with no real expertise could tell this wasn't just a rocket. It wouldn't survive a single flame. And with the green screens around it, a chilling thought crept into my mind. I don't even need to spell it out, do I? Now you understand the secret I've been trying to show you. The masked man added more fuel to the fire. "This doesn't prove anything," I said mostly to myself. "What if it's just a model for reference?" "If it's just a model, then why keep it under such tight security?" I shut my mouth, and the man didn't seem to mind. He just led me forward. "You really don't cry until you see the coffin, do you?" Soon, we circled around the rocket and reached the second door. When it opened, a hallway appeared before us, and at the end of the hallway was yet another large door. This cycle repeated 3 times as the masked man unlocked 3 layers of security, and finally, we entered the next room. This time, I couldn't speak for a long while. My stomach was twisting so badly that I almost threw up. Where I found myself now was the inside of the New Humans spacecraft. For the past 3 months, I had watched Ava live and work here every day through the live stream. The New Humans project only streams 14 hours a day, leaving the other 10 hours unbroadcasted. The official reason is that 24/7 streaming is inhumane. Astronauts need space and privacy. Sounds totally reasonable, right? Perfect excuse too. During those 10 hours, the 5 astronauts leave the broadcast room to sleep, rest, and get ready for the next show. In the 1960s, we pulled off an 11-year-long moon landing hoax. Now, NASA is doing the same thing, weaving a grand space dream for all of humanity. This is the real deal behind the New Humans project, a complete and utter scam. I couldn't say another word. I collapsed to the ground with a thud. I couldn't deceive myself or argue with the masked man anymore. On the console in front of me was the necklace I had given Ava before she left. She had always worn it during the live stream. Clearly the masked man was right. Miss Lee, Edward, George, these people who always talked about seeking knowledge were the most hypocritical in the world. They lied to me. NASA lied to me. And the one I loved most, Ava, she lied to me too. I don't understand, I finally managed after a long pause. Why are they doing this? What's the point? The masked man stayed silent for a moment. Then suddenly he raised his gun. Now, you have to do exactly as I say, otherwise you won't get any answers and I'll kill you. I didn't understand why his attitude changed so suddenly, but I had no choice but to obey. Reluctantly, I followed him to the back of the room, where the live stream cameras couldn't reach. There, I saw 2 doors. One was rusty, and the other required complicated password verification, just like the ones before. Though I was curious about what was behind the first door and why it was rusty, I didn't get a chance to ask before the masked man opened the second door and roughly shoved me inside. What followed was an endless dark hallway. The closed-off space made me lose track of time, and by the time my legs began to wobble, a door appeared before me. Unlike the high-tech doors we had seen before, this one was simple. Just a regular key would open it. When the door swung open, blinding sunlight poured in, and I could hardly open my eyes. I realized we had been walking all night without me even noticing. What shocked me even more was that outside was just an ordinary parking lot. Somehow, we had left the base and arrived in the county. The masked man pulled out a key and led me to an old Audi A6. Just as I sat down in the passenger seat and was about to fasten my seatbelt, he suddenly pulled the trigger without any warning. I instinctively ducked, expecting pain and death, but it didn't come. Instead, I heard the masked man's cheerful laughter. I looked up in disbelief, only to see flames shooting out of the gun's barrel. He had just spent an entire night scaring me with a lighter. Remember what I said? Caleb, you're just too easy to fool. Then, with a grin, he took off the mask, and I froze. The person who had ruthlessly exposed NASA's scheme to me was none other than one of the masterminds behind the whole scam. Edward, what the hell is going on? I felt like a lab rat being toyed with and snapped, "What do you mean by this?" "Caleb, calm down. Ask your questions one by one," Edward said, slipping back into his polite demeanor. "Don't worry, I'll answer everything." After a deep breath to calm myself, I asked, "What's the deal with the New Humans project? Why are you lying to people?" "That's an easy question, Caleb. Have you ever heard of the Fermi paradox?" I shook my head. In 1950, scientist Enrico Fermi brought up 2 contradictory points during a conversation with his colleagues. First, he believed that, theoretically, there should be countless alien civilizations in the Milky Way. Second, up to now, humanity has found no evidence or signs of such civilizations. To resolve the contradiction, scholars came up with a bunch of theories, one of which was the cage hypothesis. It suggests that there are indeed many civilizations in the galaxy, and like humans, they have stable stars and planetary systems that could support life. These systems provide fertile ground for life, but at the same time, they trap the life forms within their cages. Alien civilizations, like humans, are forever confined to their own solar systems. That's why humanity hasn't discovered any aliens so far. We're like countless lonely prisoners locked in different cells. This hypothesis, I hesitated, sensing something wasn't right. You can't be serious, right? Sadly, Edward nodded seriously. In fact, just like the humans in the three-body problem who were locked in by protons, our basic sciences have stopped progressing for a long time. 10 years ago, scientists discovered that controllable nuclear fusion is only possible in theory. With the current state of Earth, it can never be realized. In other words, we've hit an insurmountable bottleneck. From now until the end of the Earth, humanity will never leave the solar system. Even though I wasn't part of NASA, I couldn't help but feel a deep sadness at Edward's words. After all, exploring the stars had always been humanity's dream. But I still don't get it. What does this have to do with you lying to people? Disaster is born from despair and ends in hope. If world leaders knew that humanity would never leave Earth, what do you think would happen? Suddenly, it clicked. People would fight over Earth's limited resources and give up on sustainable development because of their inevitable doom. Our home would be torn apart, covered in smoke and ruin. As much as I hate lying, I have to admit that the New Humans project at least delayed humanity's self-destruction. The heavy truth left me speechless for a moment, but soon I found myself questioning everything again. Wait, if all of this is a lie, and Ava and the others never left Earth, then how did they die? And why are they like this now? I don't have the answer to that either, Edward admitted, but it's exactly why NASA is looking for you. Edward recounted the accident again. On the day the live stream was cut off, Ava and the others didn't leave Earth, so they naturally didn't encounter any alien life. But something even more bizarre happened. 5 people suddenly started killing each other without warning.
When people cut the live stream and rushed into the room, they found only 4 bizarre corpses. Ava, the sole survivor of the fight, had already disappeared. Since then, we realized that things were unfolding in ways that completely exceeded our understanding of the world, Edward continued. Later, 2 horrifying mass suicides orchestrated by the I organization only strengthened our belief.
I don't know what those lunatics in the I organization are trying to achieve, but I do know that getting involved with them is never a good idea. That's why we went to such lengths to find you, he added, lighting 2 cigarettes with his handgun lighter and handing one to me. I've said everything I needed to. Satisfied? I took the cigarette, smoked it, and carefully considered his previous answers. After a long pause, I stubbed out the cigarette in the car's ashtray and shook my head. Still doesn't add up. Edward also extinguished his cigarette, signaling for me to continue. 2 questions. First, how did you know Ava's body was off? Who said we knew? Edward replied with a laugh. All 4 of the corpses looked weird enough, so the last one wasn't too hard to guess. And Caleb, you're too easy to fool. From the moment you walked into the room, your expression told us everything. I nodded. He was right. I've never been one to hide my emotions easily. Second question, I pressed. There were clearly 2 doors in front of us earlier. Why were you so eager to get me out? Were you trying to hide something? What 2 doors? What are you talking about? I didn't hear anything, Edward said, furrowing his brow, clearly not pretending. I'm talking about the doors we passed on the way out. One led here, and the other was rusty, completely out of place. After hearing this, Edward suddenly reached out and touched my forehead. You're not even running a fever. Why are you babbling nonsense? There was no rusty door. When I took you out, there was only one door in front of us. Got it? Edward's words made me think of the strange left and right hands. Could it be that, like them, the door was only visible to me? All right, I said after a moment of reflection. Now I understand what happened, but I still can't fully trust you. Why not? Because I don't understand your motives. Edward looked at me, confused. Why would you suddenly betray NASA? Don't tell me it was some change of heart, feeling sorry for me and wanting to reveal the truth. Of course not, Edward replied. I just want to find Ava's body and uncover the truth behind all these strange events. No, I retorted. NASA wants to find Ava, and you do too. You have the same goal. With your position at NASA, you could have used the agency's resources. There was no need to betray them. Edward was stunned. After a moment, he smiled and said, "Looks like I underestimated you, Caleb. Turns out you're not as easy to fool as I thought." He then pulled a few A4 sheets from the car's drawer. These are copies I secretly made. The originals are with George, but I can't get them, so take a look at these. I took the A4 sheets and saw a photo of a letter. It was short, just 12 words. Find my body, then burn everything. It was Ava's handwriting. This is the only message Ava left us after the accident. Edward's voice was filled with frustration and disappointment. George is old, his body's failing, and his courage is shrinking. Any small disturbance keeps him awake at night. He's terrified of civil war, of aviation research becoming meaningless. After NASA disbanded, he could only go home and wait to die. So he stubbornly dragged us into what might be the biggest scam in human history. Now he's afraid the plan will be exposed. He's afraid of Ava and those 4 corpses, afraid of what humanity will do if it discovers the secrets they're hiding. From the beginning, his only goal was to find Ava and, following her letter's instructions, burn everything. Burn everything, Edward said, his voice rising with anger as he slapped the steering wheel. Damn it, this was supposed to be the key to a new world, a discovery that could upend human understanding, and he wants to burn it all. Tell me, Caleb, he turned and stared at me, his eyes bloodshot. Should I betray that damned old man? In the end, I chose to trust Edward. After all, his outburst didn't seem fake. It felt like a long-buried volcano finally erupting after years of pressure. It turned out that novels and movies were right. Those who seem polite on the surface are often the most dangerous. Of course, aside from these subjective feelings, there was one more important reason. Neither Edward nor I had any other choice. Before Ava disappeared, she had left 2 conflicting messages, one telling NASA to burn everything, and the other asking me to take her body to designated locations. No one knew why she did this, but it was clear that while I wanted to bring Ava back to life, Edward wanted to uncover the secrets. We both had to follow different paths. So I took him to the forest, climbed a tree, and retrieved the backpack. The left and right hands were not pleased that I hadn't returned on time. As soon as I came down from the tree, they slapped me several times. I wasn't angry because I noticed Edward was smiling. Looks like letting you go secretly was the right move, he said, eyes fixed on the left and right hands. Who would have thought Ava's body not only looked strange, but her hands could move too? If we can figure out all the secrets this time, even if I die, it will have been worth it. Knowledge is power, I said with a smirk. You shouldn't be at NASA. You should be a philosopher. Not possible, he replied. I'm not as learned as they are. Really? I think you're just as dangerous as they are. Ordinary people dealing with you guys could easily get stuck in a trap if they're not careful. As we chatted, we started the car and headed north. Outside the window, the sun was blazing overhead, scorching the earth. Maybe it was the air conditioning in the car blowing too hard, but I suddenly got goosebumps all over. At that moment, I finally understood what it felt like to be the fish on the chopping block, with humans wielding the knife. Perhaps the old saying was true. Surviving a great calamity will bring you future blessings. From that point on, our journey went unexpectedly smoothly. Neither the I organization nor NASA could track us down. The former lost us when the GPS was disabled, and the latter, well, with Edward, the traitor, on our side, it was no surprise they couldn't catch us. He knew NASA's operational habits like the back of his hand. Even the slightest movement would be noticed by him, and he would always lead me out of harm's way. Because of this, even though the third destination was deep in the Alps, we reached it a day ahead of schedule, and the journey was almost entirely uneventful. What surprised me was that the next day, as I anxiously entered the Alps, I didn't see any trace of the I organization. This isn't right. "What's wrong?" Edward asked. "Last time, whether it was the Sphinx or the Leshan giant Buddha, there were always people from the I organization on site looking for me. Though I don't know how they found out everything, it doesn't make sense for them to have shown up twice before, and now there's nothing. They might not want to come anymore, or maybe they only knew the time and location of the first two, or perhaps it was all just a coincidence." Edward shrugged nonchalantly. "Why think so much about it? Those people from the I organization are all crazy." I didn't answer him. Something didn't sit right with me. Edward's explanation might have sounded reasonable coming from someone else, but not from him. The previous appearances of the I organization weren't coincidences. They knew as much as I did, if not more. If Edward was truly seeking the truth, there's no way he'd just ignore them. Moreover, the I organization had been his old enemies for years. The more I thought about it, the more suspicious I became, and as my mind raced, my steps slowed involuntarily. Soon, I wasn't walking alongside Edward anymore. We had separated, with him walking ahead and me trailing behind. Between us were not just tourists, but also the thickening white mist. The Alps were foggy now. The fog rolled in quickly, blotting out the sun. Before I knew it, everything around me was hazy, and I couldn't even make out my own shoes. This wasn't just the usual summer fog. It was so thick that even on a cold winter morning, I'd never seen anything so exaggerated. What was strange was that, although the fog was caused by the cold, I didn't feel any chill. Instead, I felt stiflingly warm and humid. I quickened my pace, but the once crowded Alps were now empty. I walked for what felt like an eternity, sweating and gasping for breath. Yet I didn't see a single person. The fog didn't dissipate. It only thickened, making each breath a struggle, as if drowning in the sea. I was suffocating. Panic started to set in. "Edward, are you still there? Hello? Is anyone there? Is anyone around? Can someone help me?" There was no reply, only the sound of my own voice echoing. I tried using my phone to call for help, but not only was there no signal, but the battery was draining at a terrifying speed. 1 minute it was at 80%, the next it powered off. Just as I was losing hope, I heard a noise behind me. Familiar scent. As the voice sounded, the weight in my backpack suddenly increased. I didn't react in time and fell backward onto the ground. Pitiful insect, after thousands of years, you've only grown more useless. When I heard this, I could distinctly feel something emerging from my backpack. I turned around and saw the one I had been longing for. Ava, resurrected, stood before me, completely naked. I had no idea when she had regained her body and legs, but like her left and right hands, every inch of her skin exuded a sense of majesty and sanctity. She was like something out of a dream, as if painted in vibrant colors, like a sculpture that gleamed in the sunlight, more alive, three-dimensional and perfect than any artist's creation. She was beauty itself. She walked toward me slowly, her limbs no longer possessing their own consciousness, but moving in harmony with the beautiful head on her body. Her face, though unmistakably Ava's, looked so alien that I almost wanted to kneel before her, to see me as you would a god. No kneeling, no bowing, how disgraceful. When the dog is reunited with its master, it still wags its tail and barks. Yet you've forgotten even the basics of manners. How pathetic, how tragic. As she spoke, the thick fog suddenly cleared around us, as if the people of ancient times had parted in reverence when the king appeared, bowing along the roadside to make way. Ava, I swallowed hard, gathering my courage to speak. Is it really you? She didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at me from above. I was about to ask again when she suddenly reached out and grabbed my throat. Why do you smell like them? Them? Who? I managed to gasp out. I don't understand. What do you mean? Wizards, exorcists, different names in different times and places. But the one thing that never changes is that they are filthy, disgusting, like insects that cannot be killed. Just mere mortals, yet they keep ruining my plans. Ava gritted her teeth, her eyes blazing with fury. I can see the consequences of their actions on you, and it displeases me. Her grip tightened, and I felt my throat constricting, as if I were about to suffocate. But what truly terrified me was her eyes. Those eyes seemed harmless at first, but when I locked eyes with them, a searing pain shot through my head, as if a hand had reached into my skull and was mercilessly emptying my brain of everything. For me, this pain surpassed death itself. Thankfully, it didn't last long. After a few moments, she released her grip and stopped looking at me. Fine, I'll spare your life, since you didn't do it on purpose. She walked over to a large stone and sat down. Her posture wasn't dignified, but there was an overwhelming pressure emanating from her. You should thank your wife, Ava. She is a devout believer. Otherwise, with your dull nature, you'd never be worthy to serve as a God's servant in this lifetime. From now on, you must remember every word I say. The creatures of the Alps are the most loyal, but their power is limited. They can only sustain my existence in this fog until I regain all my limbs. Your mission is not yet over. I've seen your memories. Ava's message was split into two parts. When she said to burn everything, she didn't mean her body or those of the failures, but the final seal. The place where it all started is where it will end. Return to the beginning, for there lies the final body. Your wife, Ava, was chosen by the gods. She proved her ability and devotion through countless trials. Now that you've been honored in the same way, don't disappoint her and never disappoint the gods. Her words made my head spin. At that moment, I couldn't tell if she was really Ava or something else entirely. I don't understand. Who are you, and what do you mean by gods? The woman flicked her fingers upward, and an invisible force gripped my chin, forcing me to look up. Caleb, from now on, you will no longer be ignorant. The sky above me remained shrouded in mist, but it no longer appeared as an indistinguishable white mass. Instead, the mist swirled and shifted, forming vivid, lifelike images. I saw all the gods from ancient times to the present. From Pangu in the east to Jehovah in the west, they hung high in the air, casting countless eerie, piercing gazes at me. I tried desperately to look down, but I couldn't move. All I could do was open my mouth in a desperate scream. The gaze of those beings felt as though it could burn my very soul. I couldn't think of any way to escape but to surrender. What made it worse was that these gods didn't seem to appear suddenly. They felt as though they had always been there, looking down upon humanity from the heavens above. I've seen your memories. Someone has been using you. Though they've hidden themselves well, I am a prophet, and with the eyes of the gods, I can see the cause and effect. Caleb, NASA is just a bunch of idiots not to be feared. But when facing the cunning I organization, you must... Her words were cut off, and Edward's voice suddenly filled my ears. Be careful. I snapped back to reality and realized the mist had dissipated. I was now standing on the edge of a cliff. I looked around but couldn't see the woman anywhere. She, like the fog, had appeared and disappeared without leaving a trace. It was as if she had never been there at all, like a dream. After our journey in the Alps, we successfully awakened both my left and right feet. Like my hands before, they were now given profound names, Dao and Xian. With that, all 4 limbs were complete. Only the torso remained. Great job, Caleb. Now there's just one last place left. Edward was unusually excited, pushing me to continue every day. If I hesitated even slightly, he would get so anxious that he would cough up blood. Too bad the note Ava left me doesn't have the final coordinates. We'll just have to look for it. I didn't tell him the truth, but instead kept stalling. Now that I had all 4 limbs, Ava was starting to show signs of complete unity. Each part of her no longer acted independently, but thought and acted as a whole person. I couldn't shake the feeling. She was becoming more and more like the woman from that thick mist. But shouldn't that fog have been my dream? Who was the woman with Ava's appearance, and what did she want? The images of gods, the unfinished warnings she had given me, countless questions constantly gnawed at my mind, preventing me from finding peace. One night, we stayed at a guest house in a county town. Perhaps due to the harsh conditions, I tossed and turned in bed, unable to fall asleep. And then I heard a knock on the door. "Who's there?" There was no answer from outside. I sat up in bed, gripping the ashtray tightly. At that moment, Ava was sleeping on the other bed, and Edward would never ignore my questions. "Who is it? If you don't answer, I'll call the police." The knocking continued, but still no one replied. Just as I was about to take out my phone to ask for help, the eerie knocking suddenly stopped. I sighed in relief and set the ashtray down. It seemed someone had gotten drunk and accidentally knocked on the wrong door. But just as I thought this, the door opened. Outside, a bald monk in a robe stood with his hands pressed together in a greeting, bowing toward me. I froze, unable to react at first, and simply watched as he walked in. He moved slowly, but the air around him seemed to whip into a frenzy as he slammed the door shut behind him. When he reached me, he grabbed my chin and forced me to meet his gaze. In his hollowed-out eye sockets were nothing but unsettling, murky white eyes. "What? What do you want?" I dared not move, fearing that if I resisted, he would snap my neck without hesitation. "Do you know?" "What?" His question came out of nowhere, leaving me completely confused. "The myths, the gods, and the Buddhas," the monk continued, ignoring my confusion. "They are all real, just living in a different space from ours. Once they were closely intertwined with human life, giving birth to countless religions and beliefs. But now, humans can no longer see them because someone forged a door to separate everything. It's us, the I." At this, the monk suddenly released his grip, and I seized the opportunity, rushing to the bedside to try to wake Ava. His presence felt too strange, and to fight the supernatural, I had to use supernatural means. However, when I lifted the covers, I was shocked to find the bed empty. Ava had vanished. "Don't be afraid, Caleb. I mean you no harm. I just don't understand why the leader would entrust such an important responsibility to you, a foolish and ignorant ordinary person." The monk's voice came from behind me. "So please forgive me. I must confirm for myself whether you can endure the test and pass the trial." As soon as he finished speaking, his hand pressed down on my crown. In an instant, a flood of pain engulfed me. Pain, sorrow, despair. All negative emotions were amplified to their extreme, exploding one after another within me. I saw the gods atop the mountains, mercilessly slaughtering every mortal who dared to challenge them with cliffs, falling rocks, and avalanches. I saw the gods beneath the sea, using currents, tsunamis, and reefs to cruelly devour those who sought to explore the world. I saw giants on the earth casually crushing thriving kingdoms into the ground just for fun. I saw those gods hiding beyond the sky, treating all life on earth as mere playthings, observing, toying with, and tormenting them with random misfortune, cruelly watching as mortals struggled in vain. "It's impossible," I heard myself say, even though I hadn't opened my mouth. "Mortal beings are like ants. They cannot resist. They must only surrender." Deep inside, something was crumbling. I bent down and knelt, preparing to crawl at the monk's feet. But just then a young voice interrupted me. "Daddy?" In that instant, it was as if I had been transported back 5 years. Back then, every weekend, after Poppy finished her tutoring, she would beg me to take her to the nearby park. She had made some friends her age there, other middle schoolers, and they would spend the whole afternoon playing together. During those times, I would sit on a bench, taking out my phone to listen to music and watch shows, passing the time. Poppy was always so sensible, never needing me to remind her. Every time it was time to leave, she would quietly come to my side and gently wake me from my engrossed state in front of the TV. "Dad, let's go home and eat." I will never, ever forget the sound of her calling me Dad. "Poppy, is that you, Poppy? Where are you? Tell Dad, I'll come to find you right now." The pain still lingered, but it no longer seemed important. I struggled to get up and began searching for Poppy. "Don't lose hope, Dad. Even though you can't see me, I can always see you." "Poppy, where are you? Come out and see Dad. I miss you so much." Perhaps it was a blessing from above. After I said those words, I saw Poppy slowly walking toward me. She stood in front of me, gently cupping my face in her hands. "Don't worry, Dad. You don't need to search for me. As long as you keep going, you will see me again." Poppy's body started to become transparent. I was frantic, reaching out to grab her. But just as my hand touched her skin, her face suddenly morphed into Edward's. "Stop dawdling, Caleb. Come with me." Edward's voice pulled me back to reality. I looked around and saw that at some point the monk had been subdued by Ava. Outside, the sounds of fighting echoed, with what seemed like a full-blown shootout underway. "What happened?" "The I organization and NASA are here," Edward explained while hurriedly packing. "Now they're fighting among themselves. If we wait a bit longer, they'll sort it out, and we'll be stuck here for good." The guest house was a single-story building. We didn't waste any time and immediately jumped out of the window. But the I organization and NASA were clearly well prepared. Soon, we heard a whistle from the roof signaling their presence. The sounds of fighting abruptly stopped, and both sides rushed toward us. In the chaos, we weaved through the maze-like alleys, cornered multiple times. Fortunately, they weren't coordinated. Each time one side managed to trap us, the other side would suddenly break through and fight them off. Finally, we broke through and made it to the parking lot. Although Edward and I were both injured, it wasn't anything serious. "We've made it out," Edward sighed in relief. "But it's strange. How did our whereabouts get exposed so suddenly?" Before I could answer, a loud shout rang out. Several members of the I organization had been lying in wait in the parking lot, and now they were charging toward us with weapons drawn. In the nick of time, Edward shoved me aside and stepped forward. I didn't hesitate to get into the car. Ava naturally followed me. She never cared about Edward's life. If anything, she might have even been wishing for his death. Maybe someone tampered with the car, but I failed to start it multiple times. When I finally managed to start the engine, Edward had already dealt with the attackers and was rushing to catch up. Covered in blood, he stood outside the car, banging on the window, signaling for me to let him in. I didn't unlock the door, instead rolling down the window just a crack. "Where are the others?" "They're all dealt with," Edward panted. "Caleb, let me in, quick." "Is the parking lot safe now?" "Almost. The others won't find this place anytime soon," Edward said, sounding a bit confused. "What's going on, Caleb? Why do I feel like something's off with you?" "It's not me who's off," I replied. "It's you." "Edward, I'm not letting you in." Edward stared at me in shock. "Caleb, what are you talking about? I just saved you, and now you're going to repay me like this." "Edward, do you remember when you asked me why I always made Ava wear black t-shirts and shorts at night?" I didn't rush to drive away. Edward had been deceiving me for so long, and now it was my turn to retaliate. "Did you notice that, whether it was the I organization or NASA, those people were all focused on chasing us, but no one cared about her? Clearly they were chasing us to find Ava, but they ignored her right in front of them. Don't you find that strange?" "The reason is simple. Ordinary people can't see Ava's revived limbs." "You suspect me because of that? Just because I can see her?" "Of course not," I shook my head. "That's not the point. The point is that you lied. When you took me away from NASA, I clearly saw a rusty door nearby. At the time, I felt like that door was familiar, but I couldn't place why. Later, I realized it had the same aura as Ava." "Edward, if you could see Ava's limbs, there's no way you couldn't see that rusty door. From the beginning, you've already been exposed." Edward's face turned ashen. He wanted to say something, but I had already rolled up the window, so he could only helplessly pound on the side of the car in frustration. Finally, I stepped on the gas and sped away. After getting rid of Edward, I took Ava back to the parking lot connected to NASA's headquarters. Now it seemed the situation was finally about to reach its conclusion. But fate didn't want to make it easy for me. As soon as I got out of the car, a snake suddenly lunged out and bit Ava. The snake had clearly been lurking in the car for a while. It was bright green and it looked highly venomous. Thankfully, its target wasn't me, but Ava, who, although in pain, was fine moments later. After tearing the snake in half in anger, Ava followed me into the tunnel. After what felt like an endless journey, we finally arrived at that live streaming room, filled with lies. "Don't move." Surprisingly, when we pushed open the door, we were met with the dark barrel of a gun. "Gee, Caleb, I'm giving you two choices." George didn't waste time and got straight to the point. "First, join us and remain silent forever. Second, die here and never speak again." "It's been a long time, George," I said, my voice trembling, though I forced myself to keep the fear in check. "Of course I'll choose, but before I do, could you tell me why you're here?" "Stop stalling. Do you really think NASA's expensive security investment is just for show? The few teams that were sent after you and that traitor, there were just a handful. I've been here waiting for you all along." "Why?" "Because you would eventually come back to the gates that separate humanity from freedom. Now, I'll give you 3 seconds. 3. George counted, tapping his cane against the ground. 2. 1. In the final second, Ava's voice suddenly rang in my mind. "Crouch down and cover your ears." I obeyed without thinking. George, seeing that I hadn't responded, issued his final order: "Shoot." As the guards pulled the triggers, I saw that Ava's limbs suddenly sprouted thousands of mouths filled with sharp teeth. All the mouths screamed in unison. The shrieks reverberated through the room as if they were going to tear everything apart. In the next moment, the space around us began to warp. George, the guards, and even the bullets that had just been fired all disappeared. What? What happened to them? I asked in disbelief, turning to Ava. What did you do to them? Don't worry, Ava replied. They're not dead. I just transported them to another place. As she spoke, the organs on her limbs kept shifting, sometimes mouths, sometimes eyes or noses. You did well, Caleb. I can feel it. The power of the Masters is entering my body. Masters? What Masters? Ava didn't answer, instead walking straight to the rusty door. Naturally, I had no choice but to follow quickly. Inside the rusty door was a staircase leading downward, the end disappearing into endless darkness. I followed Ava carefully, and after a long while, lights began to appear along the sides of the staircase. As the lights flickered on, the stairs grew steeper, but the end still wasn't in sight. It wasn't until my legs started to weaken that the stairs finally flattened out, the space on both sides narrowing and the lights illuminating the entire passage. At this moment, I noticed that the passage seemed to have workbenches along the sides, covered in books and computers. From high-tech computers to ancient scrolls bound in sheepskin, these items from different eras weren't categorized, but instead were haphazardly piled on the tables. Curious, I paid close attention and found that, despite coming from different periods, their content was remarkably consistent. All were research studies about history, religion, and theology. Every era, Ava began, noticing my curiosity. There are always people who accidentally discover the hidden truths of the world. And every time that happens, they tirelessly study these truths. Unfortunately, a small group of people always tries to cover human eyes, so these studies are repeatedly interrupted and restarted. That's why you see the products from different eras all mixed together. Now it makes sense. I nodded, then asked, but what exactly are they studying? They're studying my masters, Ava replied, or in human terms, gods, Buddhas, Tao, immortals, saints, anything that transcends the mortal world, all of it is them. Studying the gods? Why? Are they trying to figure out if they really exist? Of course not, Ava laughed. Caleb, anyone who comes here, even if they don't say it out loud, deep down, they already believe in the existence of gods. I stayed silent, acknowledging her words. Caleb, what they really want to study is divinity. Everyone who has glimpsed the truth shares the same question. Is divinity good or evil? After Ava asked her question, we finally reached our destination, a massive cave. At the center of the cave stood an altar, several meters high, with a blazing bonfire burning atop it. Although it was far away, I could clearly see that the flames flickered with fragmented images. A sense of foreboding washed over me, as if I was about to open Pandora's box. So like those before me, I asked the same question. Wait! I stepped forward to stop Ava. Before you go up, tell me, are the gods' intentions good or bad? You're mistaken, Caleb, Ava said. The thoughts of gods are the same as truth. There is no good or bad. With that, she shoved me aside and stepped up to the altar. For some reason, fear suddenly overwhelmed me. Ava looked extremely pleased and even began to show kindness toward me. She said I had done well, that the gods would forgive my ignorance and spare my life, instead granting me the role of their spokesperson. She also said that although this was not the gods' will, out of her personal gratitude toward me, she would reveal everything about Ava. And so, when she reached the top of the altar, she grabbed my hand and reached into the raging fire. I couldn't pull away and could only let the flames sear my skin. Although the pain was excruciating, my hand didn't burn to a crisp, and before me, Ava's memories began to surface. While working at NASA, Ava had dedicated herself to the exploration of the universe. Until one day, scientists collectively realized that controlled nuclear fusion was impossible, and humanity would never leave the solar system. NASA fell into despair, and humanity's fate became inevitable. The pursuit of space exploration was suddenly meaningless. At that moment, George appeared. He had been a soldier in his youth, full of energy. After retiring, he had no outlet for his excess energy, so he became obsessed with cave exploration. During one of his expeditions, he accidentally glimpsed the truth of the world. Later, he convinced NASA to recruit Ava, Miss Lee, Edward, and other top talents to attempt to unravel the mystery. They used the New Humanity plan as a cover, but in reality they were researching how to open a gateway to another world. Eventually, the 5 astronauts, including Ava, reached the altar and lit the bonfire. But they discovered that only one of them could become the prophet connecting the gods. To fight for this position, the 5 began to kill each other. In the end, only Ava survived. Now you should understand the whole story, right? Ava was the most loyal to the gods, which is why she survived. I didn't respond to her words, just staring blankly at the fire. Wait, I'm going to enter the fire and complete the final ritual. My body and head will be reborn in the flames, transforming me into the true prophet to welcome the arrival of the masters. As she spoke, she jumped into the bonfire. Before that, the real Ava will briefly appear. George was sitting on the couch, flanked by heavily armed guards. If you have anything left to say, hold on to it. This is your last chance. The flames consumed Ava. I watched her struggle and twist in the fire. Her eyes were shut tight, yet she seemed to revel in the pain. Gradually, her head and torso became opaque, no longer transparent, and her body was as perfect as her limbs. At that moment, her eyes suddenly opened, and a flash of pain crossed them. I knew then the real Ava had returned. Seizing the moment, I pulled her out of the flames. A howl of rage instantly filled the altar. "What are you doing? Put her back. I told you, you only have the right to say goodbye." At the same time, a powerful force exploded from the flames, trying to pull Ava back in. I held on to Ava tightly, refusing to let go. In the memories I had seen earlier, I also glimpsed other things that only I, with Ava's connection, could see. The reason Ava survived the bloodbath was because she was different from the other 4. After seeing the truth, the others fell into irrational fanaticism, but she realized that if the gods' will truly came to pass, humanity would likely face utter destruction. To stop this, and to survive, she had no choice but to kill the other 4. Yet she didn't escape her fate. She still became the prophet. Caleb, the real Ava, regained her consciousness in my arms and smiled tiredly. "You did it. You really did it. Hold on to me. I'll take you away." "It's no use." Ava shook her head. "Caleb, kill me." "What?" I was stunned. "Kill me now, Caleb. This is the last chance." "No, I absolutely won't." Before I could finish my sentence, a bullet pierced through Ava's head. "No." I turned around and saw Edward, the monk, and many members of the I organization standing behind me. It's you!" I was so enraged I could barely speak. Why is it you?" "Caleb, do you really think you've outsmarted me?" "I purposely left an opening, all to make you doubt me. That way, when I lured the space agency and the I organization here to clash, you'd seize the opportunity to drive me away." "Why?" "Because I understand George, and I understand what the so-called prophet is. If I had followed directly, I would have been sent away with the others during the earlier transfer. So I pretended to be driven off and hid a poisonous snake in the car to weaken the prophet's power. I waited. "I didn't ask you this. I asked why you killed her," I shouted, holding Ava's lifeless body and glaring at Edward. "Because that was Ava's wish." Just as Edward finished speaking, the bonfire behind me suddenly grew, and the raging heat blasted me to the ground. A piercing voice echoed through the entire altar. "Insignificant ants, how dare you defy me? Defy the Master. I will kill you all." The flames, filled with the fury to burn everything, mercilessly surged toward us. Just as I was about to be engulfed, Edward stepped forward, positioning himself in front of me. He crouched down, eye level with me. "Mr. Caleb, do you remember I told you I was born in 1980? That wasn't a lie, but I wasn't born in 1980. I was born in 1580. For nearly 5 centuries I've been fighting against them. I know them too well, so rest assured, I won't let anything happen to you." With those words, Edward coughed up blood and removed a necklace from his neck, placing it around mine. At that moment I had never felt him more trustworthy. "Mr. Caleb, Miss Ava was a hero. She could have escaped, but she chose to stay in the game to bring hope to you and all of humanity. Miss Ava once said, 'When humanity loses hope, it inevitably falls into destruction.' So, even if we stop the prophet this time, without a solution, it will rise again." What do you mean by that? The events unfolding before me overloaded my mind. Who are you? I was the leader of the I organization. Once was. Once was? Then who is the current leader? Isn't it obvious? The current leader is you. Me, but I know nothing. The necklace I gave you is a symbol of leadership and inheritance. Once you wear it, you will remember everything. Edward stood up. His coughing grew worse, blood soaking through his front. "Miss Ava brought hope to humanity and to you. I believe you will protect it until death." With those words, Edward turned resolutely and walked into the roaring flames. From then on, I began dreaming every night. After a full year, I finally learned everything from those dreams. At the dawn of humanity, there were indeed gods in the world. They were beings from a higher dimension, and humans were as insignificant as ants in their presence. So, they created the solar system, trapping humanity within it, playing with them as they wished. Those who followed them were called priests or prophets, while those who defied them died in divine punishment, suffering agonizing deaths. Until one day, someone could no longer bear the humiliation and led a portion of humanity to rise up in rebellion. Taking advantage of the gods' carelessness, they closed the gateway between the 2 dimensions. These people became the earliest members of the I organization. As the name suggests, the I organization existed to protect humanity, to serve as a gate that blocked the gods. Over the long years that followed, the I organization constantly battled the gods' followers, one side trying to shut the door, the other trying to open it, to welcome their masters. The followers had their own powers, but the first leader of the I organization was no mere person. In fact, they had stolen many rare treasures from the gods. The necklace Edward gave me was one of them. Not only did it pass on memories, but it also used special technology to ensure eternal youth. Unfortunately, it doesn't grant eternal life. As time passes, the bearer suffers both physical and mental torment. This is why each leader of the I organization has been a human hero, tested through layers of trials. Throughout history, the I organization has continually suppressed the followers, until humanity entered the age of modernization, with science advancing at an exponential rate. Humans no longer limited their vision to Earth. Humanity began yearning for the unknown, desiring to explore the entire universe. However, the gods had long locked humanity in the solar system. No matter how hard we tried, we could not escape this prison. At the end of science lies mysticism. Desperate scientists turned their attention beyond the bounds of science. Soon, someone noticed that the solar system was not as impenetrable as believed. There was, in fact, a hidden passage. But this passage had been deliberately sealed. Despite knowing the risks involved, many chose to take the gamble. After all, no one wanted to remain a prisoner for life. With both sides working together, the I organization was on the verge of failure, and humanity would once again face those terrifying higher dimensional beings, until Ava appeared. The flames before the altar could amplify human emotions to the point where one could no longer control themselves, completely submitting to the higher dimensional beings. Yet perhaps because of her daughter's death, Ava had no more emotional attachments, and that day she was the only one of the 5 astronauts to retain her sanity. Through the flames they saw the visage of the higher dimensional world. The other 4 were ecstatic, but Ava continued searching for what she truly wanted. Creating the solar system relied on higher dimensional technology. If humanity could master this technology, they could bypass the gods while venturing into the universe. Of course, the benefits of peering into the higher dimensions were not limited to that. Ava soon realized that in the eyes of higher beings, lower dimensional creatures like us were like figures living within a painting. Nothing about the future was irreversible, and the past was not set in stone. Thus, a bold plan formed in her mind. She deliberately applied to the followers, intending to open the passage in the most brutal way possible, by sacrificing herself to become the prophet. Due to the existence of the I, the higher dimensional beings could not perceive her clearly, only sensing her vaguely. They believed Ava to be devout, but never suspected that she was transmitting a message. Each sacrificial event, its time and place, was actually a part of the formula, a small fragment of the creation of the solar system. Then, she contacted the ailing leader, Edward. Together, they successfully completed the entire plan. But I can't understand why I was chosen as the next leader. I've lost all my family, and I only want to find the next successor and leave this world. Professor, what exactly does the formula mean? The student's question brought me back to reality. After the Great Fire, I became the only person who knew the formula. Since then, I've traveled between various universities, teaching professors and students about it. The girl in front of me is named Ruby. She's my favorite student of late. She's smart, lively, and most importantly, her features bear a striking resemblance to Poppy's. I often ask myself, if my daughter hadn't died, she'd probably be about this age now, wouldn't she? Poppy, I knew you'd be here. Suddenly, a girl burst in, grabbing Ruby's hand. Your school is so big. I had such a hard time finding you. Excuse me, what did you just call her? I asked in shock, staring at the girl who had just entered. The girl seemed slightly embarrassed to answer, but eventually Ruby smiled brightly and explained, Teacher, she called me by my old name. When I was in middle school, my birth parents abandoned me, and my adoptive parents gave me a new name, but some old friends still call me by my old name. Then, I asked, trembling, what was your old name? For a moment, I seemed to hear Ava's voice in my ear. Caleb, this is the hope I left for you. Poppy, she said,